Welcome to the World Storytelling Cafe. I'm Kirsty Hartsiotis and I'm a member of the 6-strong group Fire Springs that was founded in Bath nearly 20 years ago, this year in fact. And I'm going to be telling you a few Greek folk tales. Now, these are not your usual Greek stories. You won't find any Perseuses or Theseuses here. These are not stories of ancient Greece, but rather the stories of a more modern Greece, the folk tales of the ordinary people. These stories I'm going to tell you are mostly about the exotica. What are the exotica? They're a bit like our fairies. And indeed, the stories I'm going to be telling you today are about a particular kind of exotica, that is the Nereid. And the Nereid, well, in ancient times, a Nereid was a sea nymph, just like a dryad is a nymph of an oak tree. They were nature spirits. Sometimes they were benign, sometimes they weren't so benign. Sometimes they consorted with the gods, sometimes they helped ordinary mortals. But the Nereids are very like our fairies in that they are capricious, very beautiful, not quite human in their way of thinking, and they could do harm. And the first story I'm going to tell you is all about that, or not. It's a story from the Peloponnese, where I lived for a year, about 16 years ago now, and this is from the part of the Peloponnese that's called the Mani. And the Mani is, if you can picture the Peloponnese, it's that southern bit of Greece, mainland Greece, which is shaped a bit like this. And this prong here is the Mani, and it's very dry, it's very arid, it's very mountainous, it is famously full of very fierce people. And this story is quite a fierce little story in its own way, but it's not the inhabitants of the Mani that come across as fierce in this one. Long ago, in the village of Limeni, on the coast of the Mani, on the Peloponnese, there was a solitary date palm. And this tree grew up out of 2 big rocks in the harbour. There was no other tree like it in the village. I mean, otherwise the village of Limeni was pretty ordinary for the Mani. It had big stone houses, and behind them there were towers where families could shelter if there was a blood feud, as there often was in the Mani. And the harbour was full of fishing boats. And our story concerns one of those fishermen. He lived on his own, and he did what he pleased. When the other folk of the village in the summertime would go and sleep on their flat roofs to guard against the heat inside their houses, he instead would go and sleep in his fishing boat. And he would be rocked by the gentle motion of the water as a mother rocks her baby in the cradle. One night, as he was sleeping in his boat, the boat suddenly lurched to one side as if something heavy had got in. When he opened his eyes, he saw there, sitting in the boat above him, there were 2 women. These women, they were so beautiful that he knew they could not be earthly women. He was certain that they were Nereids. It was more than just their beauty. Their long hair that came down to their waists, even in the moonlight, he could see that it was dark green, not black. And their skin had a kind of fishy pallor. And the fishing boat, well, it always smelt a little bit of fish, but now it really stank. And he was sure that these were Nereids of the sea. And he knew that whilst they were drop dead gorgeous, it was him who was likely to drop dead if he was caught looking at them. So he squeezed his eyes tight shut, and he sent up a prayer to the Panagea, the all-holy Mother of God. And no sooner had he done that than off shot the boat straight across the sea. Quick as a flash, it came to a stop. He felt the boat lurch once more. When he dared open his eyes, he saw that they had come to a distant land. There was a harbour in front of him, and there were strange smells coming through the air, smells of spices and incense, and when he peered out carefully over the rim of the boat, he could see the harbour stretched out in front of him, and there were many market stalls along the harbour, and there were men walking around wearing long robes, and their skin was darker than his skin. And he saw the two Nereids. They were in front of one of the market stalls. They were haggling with the market trader. And as he watched, he saw them buy what looked like a great sack of dates. And they hauled the sack back, and he lay back down as if he was still asleep, and they plonked the sack beside him. He got back into the boat, and off it went again, straight across the sea until it stopped. He felt them get out, haul out the bag of dates, and when he dared open his eyes, he saw that he was in a harbour that was not unlike the harbour at Lemeni, but it was a bit different, because this was a harbour full of houses that were painted white. And he realised that he had come to one of the Greek islands, and there, coming down through one of the narrow little lanes, he could see two more women, also unearthly beauty, two more Nereids. And some kind of transaction took place between the two of them. The bag of dates was handed over, and something was given to his Nereids, and then they came back to the boat, and he lay back down again. They clambered on board, and quick as a flash, off they went once more. And as they were sailing across the sea this time, one of the Nereids turned to the other, and she said, "The fisherman in the bottom of the boat. We'd better kill him, hadn't we?" And the fisherman's heart nearly stopped. But then the other Nereid said, "Well, I don't know. I mean, he hasn't opened his eyes. He's just stayed asleep the whole time." And the other Nereid, "Yeah, you're right. Besides, we do owe him one for the loan of his boat." And with that, the boat stopped once more. And the two Nereids got out of the boat, so he thought, but he stayed with his eyes scrunched up tight. And he waited, and he waited, and he waited until he could see the dawn light filtering through his closed lids. And then he opened his eyes, and he sat up, and he was back in his own home village of Lemeni. Got out of the boat, and only then did he realise that he was soaking wet. The bottom of the boat was full of water. They'd managed to splash it in there by going so fast, and so he started to bail the boat out. But then he saw in the bottom of the boat there was a date, and he picked it up. This is a bad luck date. I'm sure of it, absolutely sure. And if he did anything with this date, it would cause him bad luck. And he thought maybe he should just drop it in the sea. But no, if he dropped it in the sea, then surely he would never catch a fish again. So he took the date, and he took aim across to the other side of the harbour where there was nothing except rocks, and he threw that date, and it landed between two large rocks. But the date had been touched by the exotica, so it couldn't perish. It took root, even though there were just rocks there. And it grew, strong and tall and sturdy. It grew to be a great date palm. And that is how there came to be a date palm in the village of Lemeni. Sad to say, that date palm is no longer there. There's a taverna in its place now. But that taverna is called kurmas, which is the Greek word for date. But if you go to that taverna, they have a different story to tell about how the date palm got to be there. They will tell you that a monk used to live on those rocks, and that he was eating a date, and he took the stone and he dropped it amongst the rocks, and it grew up. Well, they would tell you that, wouldn't they? After all, who'd want to admit that the rocks on which they had built their taverna were Nereid touched? But you and I, we know the truth. And there are lots of stories about that, where something is explained, just as it's often explained by the fairies in Britain, by the Nereids having done something. The next story I'm going to tell you, though, is quite a different kind of story. It's a wonder tale. It still concerns a Nereid, but in this case, she's just one of a couple of more unusual characters. We might get magicians, we might get other supernatural creatures. Now, in this story, there is a character that's called a drachos, and a drachos is not, in fact, a dragon. It's something that seems to be more like an ogre. Fee, fi, fo, fum, I smell the blood of an Englishman. And this is quite a famous story in Greece. It's called The Widow's Son. Once, there was an old widow woman who lived and had lived on her own with her son for many a long year. Now, her son, who we'll call Yanni, he was a man now, and he was determined that he would earn a living to keep him and his mother. But times were hard. It was almost impossible to earn a leptaki or two. No matter what he did, they were very, very poor. And one day, he was going into the wood to gather up faggots to sell in the market, bundles of twigs. And as he was going to the market, he heard a crier in the town. And this crier was calling out that there was work available. Not just any work, it would just be a few days' work, he said. But when you got paid, you'd be paid as much money as you wanted. Yanni couldn't believe his ears, and he ran straight back home to his mother, and he told her all about it, and he begged her permission to go. And his mother, well, what could she do? She had to say yes, didn't she? So back he went to the crier. The job hadn't gone. He secured the job. He took a down payment, went back to his mother, kissed her goodbye, and then walked down to the harbour, where a merchant ship was waiting to take him on a journey. So he boarded the ship, and they sailed for several days. They travelled past big green islands with prosperous harbours. They travelled past barren islands with pirate villages, until they came at last to an island that was really nothing but a pointed mountain. And it was there that the merchant docked his ship. And the merchant, he turned to Yanni and he said, I need to go up to the top of that mountain, and I want you to throw down whatever it is you find up there. Yanni never climbed a mountain before, and he said as much. Oh, don't worry about it. I'm not expecting you to climb it, said the merchant. Don't be so silly. No, he produced a hide, and he gave it to Yanni and told him to get into it. And then he gave him a dagger. Take this dagger. I will sew up the hide. When you get to the top of the mountain, cut yourself through. How will I get to the top? Oh, said the merchant. Well, it so happens that there are giant eagles live on this mountain, and I know these eagles, and I can get them to carry you up. And so it was. Yanni got inside the hide. He took the dagger. The hide was sewn up, and then he felt something clutch the hide, and he was carried upwards, all the way upwards until he was set on top of the mountain. He cut open the hide, and when he stepped out, he saw that the mountain was covered in precious jewels. There were diamonds and sapphires and emeralds and rubies, all manner of riches. And he took handfuls of them and he flung them down the mountain. And the merchant and his men gathered them up until they had a whole boat full of them. And then, to Yanni's horror, they got back onto their ship and they sailed away. And he waved his arms and he called out to them, but they didn't come back. What was he going to do? I mean, he was still surrounded by the riches of the world. But what use were they? He was hungry. He was thirsty. He had no bread. He had no water. He didn't have anything. And the eagles were still circling overhead. Very carefully, he started to make his way down the mountain. But almost immediately, he tripped, he skidded on the gemstones, and he fell flat on his bottom. Something really hard. When he cleared the gemstones away, he saw that he had landed on a trap door. He opened it up, he looked inside, and there was a ladder stretching down into darkness. It didn't look very inviting, but it was surely better than being out there with the eagles. And so he began to climb down the ladder. And as he climbed, he went further into blackness and blackness and blackness. But then as he climbed and he climbed and he climbed, it got lighter and lighter and lighter until he found himself back in the bright light of the sun, right outside a palace. I didn't know how that had happened, but he was grateful for that. He went into the palace. It was beautiful, lavishly decorated. It was strange as well because there was nobody there. No lords, no ladies, not even any servants, not even a cat. But it was immaculately clean. And with a growing sense of unease, he made his way through the palace. He came to a kitchen. And there in the kitchen, on the huge kitchen table, there was a loaf of bread, a jug of water, and a plate of cheese. Well, he was hungry, he was thirsty, he sat down, he ate the bread, he drank the water, he ate the cheese, and he felt a lot better after that. But he was aware that he was still, in fact, inside the mountain, and he needed to get out, get home to his mother. And so he continued to explore the palace, going through ever more elaborate rooms. There were a lot of locked doors, but eventually he came to a courtyard. And there, in the courtyard, stopped dead. Right in front of him, sleeping in the afternoon sun, there lay a huge drachos. Now he knew why there was nobody in the palace. The drachos must have eaten them all up. Did they not grind human bones to make that? Well, he hadn't actually eaten human bones, had he? No, you were sure he hadn't. It just tasted like bread. But if this drachos had eaten everybody, then he was the only person left here in the palace. The only way that Yanni could get out. Well, he sidled round the courtyard. When he got close to the sleeping drachos, he saw that he was blind, that there were hollows where his eyes should be, and he felt a bit bolder. Yes, and an idea came to him. And he stepped up to the drachos and he whispered in his ear, "Father, oh father mine." And the drachos sat up, turned his head, trying to find the source of the sound. "I never knew I had a child." "Oh, yes, since I was born," said Yanni. And to his complete astonishment, the drachos swallowed it, hook, line, and sinker. And he was treated as the drachos' favoured son. He was given fine food to eat, fine clothes to wear, and the free run of the palace, and a bunch of 40 keys. The drachos said to him, "Now, there are 39 rooms that you may go in. Explore the wonders that you find in there as much as you wish. But the 40th key, you must not use it." And of course, Yanni, he agreed to this. And for a time, the 39 rooms kept him going. They were indeed full of wonders and went to magical places. But after a while, the 40th key was burning a hole in his pocket. And so he took the key. He went to the 40th door, he put the key in the lock, he turned the key, he opened the door, and he found himself in a garden, beautiful garden, full of olive trees, with flowers and a meadow all around them. And in the midst of this garden, there was a cistern full of clear, pure water. It looked so inviting. He wanted to just strip off his clothes and jump straight in. But before he could do anything, there came down from the sky 3 pigeons. And as soon as they set foot on the ground, why, they shucked off their pigeon feathers and became 3 beautiful young women, completely nude. And he knew he shouldn't look, but he did. He knew he should go away, but he didn't. He watched them as they got into the pool, completely unaware that he was there, and began to play, splash and swim. He was absolutely captivated. He knew he was being really wicked, but he couldn't stop himself. They were so beautiful, particularly the youngest one. His heart began to beat in his chest as he looked at her, and, well, to cut a long story short, he fell in love. He didn't know what to do about it. And when they came out of the pool and put back on their bird's plumage and flew away, he was quite bereft. And he took the key, he went back through the door, he locked the door, and he went back to the Dracos, and he said, "Oh, my father, I have done what you said I should not, and I understand why now. For now I have lost my heart." And the Dracos, well, he loved Yanni like his son, and so he wasn't that angry. And he told him what he had to do. And so the next day, Yanni went down to the garden once more, and he waited, and so came down the pigeons. They transformed into young women. They got into the pool, and whilst they were in the pool, Yanni crept forward and he took one of the bird's plumages, that of the youngest girl, and he hid it. He waited. After a while, the 2 elder girls got out. They put on their plumage and they flew away. But the youngest girl, she couldn't find her feathers anywhere. And she was searching, she was weeping. She sat down on the edge of the cistern, and that's when Yanni came out and he said, "Oh, you all right? Can I help you?" And she explained that she'd lost her feathers, and together the 2 of them searched. They couldn't find it. "What am I going to do?" she said. "Well," said Yanni, "you could stay here. It's very nice. And you could marry me. I will look after you." And that's what happened. This young woman, this Nereid as she was, she married Yanni, and they were happy together. They were happy together. They had 2 children together, but there was something niggling at the back of Yanni's mind. He was aware that now 2 years ago he had left his mother with just the down payment for the job that he'd done. He couldn't bear it any longer, and he went to the Dracos and he said, "Dracos, Father, I'm sorry, I lied. I'm not your son." And he told the Dracos about his mother and their poverty and the merchant and the jewels and the abandonment. But the Dracos, he really did love Yanni now. He forgave him. He said, "Of course, you must go to your mother. Bring her back here. I will open one of the 39 locked doors for you, and you will see what you shall see." So Yanni, his wife, and their 2 children, they made their way through one of the 39 doors, but it closed behind them as if it had never been there, and they found themselves on the hill above Yanni's mother's house. It's a great reunion. So good. His mother was thrilled to see her son, even more thrilled to see the rich clothes that he was wearing, even more thrilled to meet his beautiful wife and his 2 gorgeous children. But Yanni, I have no idea why he did this. But Yanni has brought his wife's plumage with him. And he said to his mother, "You must hide this." And he told her why. His mother, she was horrified. Her son, who she had thought to be an upright, fine young man, had lied to get this woman to be his wife. She just could not believe it. Well, he'd asked her to hide it. And she hid it in such a place that it was only a couple of days before Yanni's wife found it. She was so angry. So angry. She took her 2 children and she went to Yanni's mother. She couldn't bear to see him. And she said to Yanni's mother, "You tell him that if he wants me back, he will have to come and find me. Let him put on a pair of iron shoes. Let him take up an iron staff, and let him come to the castle's green, the castle's red, the castle with the 4 white towers." And with that, she handed each of her children a feather. She threw on her own feather cloak, and the 3 of them flew up into the air as pigeons. And Yanni, he was heartbroken. He didn't know what to do with himself. How could he possibly get them back? He had no idea where the Nereid had come from. Another world. The only hope he had was the Drachos. But when they'd come back, the door had sealed itself, and going back to the hillside, he could find no way back in. There was only one hope. And so, down to the harbour he went. Believe it or not, the ship was there. The merchant didn't recognise him. He got back on the ship, sailed across the sea until they came to the mountain. He was sewn up into the hide with a dagger. The eagles carried him to the top of the mountain, dropped him down. He cut his way out, opened the trapdoor, went down the ladder and found the Drachos once more and told him exactly what had happened. And the Drachos was horrified and swore that he would help his adopted son find his wife once more. He gave him a pair of iron shoes. He gave him an iron staff, and he said that he would open one of the 39 locked doors, and that would take him where he needed to be. The door let Yanni out into a forest, and for several days he walked and he found nothing, and he had no idea what he was doing there. But then he heard the sound of raised voices, shouting, the sound of fists. And he came across 2 men fighting. They seemed to be fighting over a ratty old cap, a rusty sword, and, of all things, a poplar tree. And Yanni, he went up to them and he said, "What on earth is going on? I mean, why would you want this old hat, this sword, and a tree? I mean, there's plenty of trees. We're in a forest. You have no idea how valuable these things are," said the first man. "Yes," said the second. "You see, that cap there is a cap of invisibility. That sword, tell it who you wish to cut down and it will do your work for you. And the poplar tree, well, get onto the poplar tree, tell it where to go and it will take you wherever you need to be." And Yanni, you can see the possibilities of these items, and he thought fast. It's lucky that I came along then, isn't it? Because I don't know either of you 2 from Adam. I'm a completely impartial witness. I shall decide. And what we'll do is this. And he took his iron staff and he said, "I will throw my staff, and the man who brings it back to me first, he will get what I will give him." And he took the staff and he flung it. And the 2 men raced off after it. And quick as a flash, Yanni, he had the cap on his head. He had the sword at his belt, and he was up the poplar tree. And when the men came back, grappling with the iron staff, Yanni cried out, "Poplar tree, take me to the castle's green, the castle's red, the castle with the 4 tall white towers." And quick as a flash, he was there. He left the poplar and the sword behind him, kept on the cap of invisibility, and he made his way to the castle. And almost immediately he found his wife, working as a poultry maid, with his 2 children grubbing in the dirt. He was not impressed. And when he made himself known to his wife, she was not impressed either, and she said that her father had put her in disgrace for marrying a mortal, and she was more than ready to get out of here. But if they went without his blessing, he would hound them to the ends of any earth they went to. Or what were they going to do? "We will call my father and we will get his blessing." And before he could say anything, she had called for her father. And her father, he came down the steps towards them. The king of the Nereids, would you believe? My husband has come to take me home, said his wife. Well, where is he then? Oh, he won't show himself to you, my father. I wish to see what manner of man he is. I'm sure you do, father. But he won't show himself until you give your blessing. I shall not give my blessing until I see what manner of man he is. Very well. He must do tasks for me. You see that mountain far away? That mountain, by sunset tomorrow, must become beautiful gardens. Do it. Clearly, this was impossible. But never mind. His wife had a plan. She gave him a tile, and she told him to drop it in a well. And when he did this, what came out of the well? But hundreds, thousands of men. That mountain over there, can you make it into a garden for me by sunset tonight? Well, they did. Beautiful gardens, lovely gardens. He couldn't believe his eyes. And nor could his father-in-law, not best pleased. Well, one test is not enough. You must do another. I don't want a garden. I want a harbour full of the best ships. By sunset tomorrow. And so it was. But his wife gave him another tile. Yanni dropped it down the well. Out came the men, and they transformed the gardens into a harbour. And his father-in-law was quite impressed by this, but Yanni, he didn't trust it. And he said to his wife, he's just going to give me another task. Come on, we've got to go. And his wife, she wasn't very happy about that. But at length she said, you're right. He will not give his blessing. But he will pursue us if we don't see him off. You must do whatever you have to do. And she gathered up her 2 children. And Yanni, he went and he got his sword. And then they went to his father, and he took off his cap of visibility. And no sooner had he done that than his father-in-law transformed into this monster with teeth and claws that came straight at him. And Yanni, with a sigh, he told his sword to cut his father-in-law down. And the sword, it was straight after him. And his father-in-law ran off, screaming, and quick as a flash, Yanni turned to his wife, and they ran to the poplar tree. Up the poplar tree they went with their children. Poplar tree, take me to my mother's house. And they were there. They didn't even get down from the poplar tree. They just helped his old mother up into the tree. Off they went. Take me to the Dracos's palace. And there they were. And the Dracos, he was overjoyed to have his family back once more. And the Nereid, she stepped forward. And she said, I couldn't say before because I wasn't sure about you, but you've helped my husband, and now we are back. And I have to confess something. It was me and my sisters that took your eyes from you. And we realised that you'd put a door in our garden. We don't want you looking at us, so we stole your eyes and we hid them in the palace. I know where they are. And she took the keys and she opened one of the 39 doors and brought out a small casket. And she opened it up, and there inside were the eyes. And the Dracos, he put the eyes back in his head, and he could see now his family. And they were very happy, and they lived well. But let us live better. Thank you very much. There are many more of these wonder tales, and I hope I'll get a chance to share some of them with you. But I've just got one last little story for you now, and it's not about the Nereids at all. It's quite a different little story, and again, it's one of the most well-known Greek folk tales. In fact, I learnt this story from a Greek primer when I was learning Greek the year that my husband and I lived in Greece. We started to teach ourselves a bit more Greek than we'd learnt here, and we got the first book in a series of primers for translation. and it was folk tales. And this was the first story in the book. I have to confess, it was the only story we actually managed to fully translate, and even that was pretty hard. But nonetheless, it's a great little story, and I'm pleased to tell it to you now. I hope you've enjoyed my set, and I look forward to coming back and sharing more stories with you here on the World Storytelling Cafe. And a big thank you to John Rowe for letting me perform. It's really been a privilege and a pleasure to share these stories and to know that they're going out to all of you. Once upon a time, there was a mouse. And this mouse, he was the father of a daughter. And this mouse daughter, she was very, very beautiful. In fact, her father thought that she was the most beautiful thing that he had ever seen. And she was so beautiful that he was convinced that she must marry the strongest thing in all the world to keep her safe. And he thought to himself, what's the strongest thing in all the world? Yes, it's the sun. And so he took his mouse daughter by the hand and he took her to the house of the sun. And he knocked on the door. And eventually, the sun answered. And they had to shield their eyes. But the mouse father, he said, my daughter is so beautiful that she must marry the strongest thing in all the world. And that's you, the sun. Will you marry my daughter? And the sun, he looked the mouse daughter up and down, and she was indeed beautiful. But he shook his head. I am not the strongest thing in all the world. Don't you know that all it takes is just a little cloud to cover me, and all of my beauty is covered up. If you would marry your daughter to the strongest thing in all the world, marry her to the cloud. And so the mouse father, he took his daughter by the hand and he took her to the house of the cloud, and he knocked on the door. And the cloud answered. And the mouse father, he said, my daughter is so beautiful that she must marry the strongest thing in all the world. And the sun says that you, Mr. Cloud, are the strongest thing. Will you marry my daughter? And the cloud, he looked the mouse daughter up and down, and she was indeed beautiful. But he shook his head. I am not the strongest thing in all the world. All it takes is for a puff of wind, and I've blown away. Marry your daughter to the wind, to the north wind. He's the strongest. And so the mouse father, he took his daughter to the house of the north wind, and he knocked on the door. And the north wind answered, and they nearly blew away. But the father, he held his ground, and he said, my daughter is so beautiful that she must marry the strongest thing in all the world. Will you marry my daughter? Because the cloud says that you are the strongest thing. The north wind, he looked the mouse daughter up and down, and he saw that she was indeed beautiful. But I'm not the strongest thing in the world. I mean, look over there, that tower. I've been trying to blow it down for ages, but I haven't moved a single brick. Marry your daughter to the tower. It's far stronger than me. Well, the mouse father took his daughter down to the tower, and he knocked on the door, and somehow the tower opened the door and answered. My daughter is so beautiful that she must marry the strongest thing in all the world, and the north wind says that you, the tower, are the strongest thing. Will you marry my daughter? And the tower somehow looked the mouse daughter up and down. She was very beautiful. I am not the strongest thing in all the world. You see, down in my foundations, there's something nibbling at me, and before too long, well, I will fall over. Marry your daughter to whatever is nibbling at my foundations. That's the strongest thing in all the world. And the mouse daughter, she didn't need telling twice. She let go of her father's hand, and she raced off to the foundations, and there, sure enough, nibbling away were, that's right, mice. And the mouse daughter, she looked around and she saw a mouse that she liked the look of. And before her father could say anything, the two of them were married. And so it's true that a mouse is the strongest thing in all the world. Thank you very much for listening. I've been Kirsty Hartsiotis from Fire Springs, here on the World Storytelling Cafe. Thank you very much. Bye.
People, wherever you are, thank you for listening to that last storyteller. What an amazing performance. And if you enjoyed it, the hat, look just below the story. If you're on the website, and I do encourage you to go to the website, and you can put a little in the hat. If you're in Texas, I've got a Texas hat. Yeah, I've got this in Kerrville. You could drop $1 in, or $2. If you're in England, you can drop £1 in, or more. If you're in Canada, well, you could drop a few dollars in. And maybe if you're right up north in Lapland, you could drop a few kroner in, or maybe €1 or 2. It will be much appreciated. Thank you. Don't forget the hat and enjoy the stories.